In this nugget, we're going to continue our discussion of group policy objects. Here we're going to look at some specific group policy processing adjustments. In our last nugget, we looked at the scope of management. We saw different ways that group policy objects apply depending upon where you link them. Here, we're going to go beyond the default flow of the scope of management and look at processing adjustments. Things you can do to force group policy objects to not apply the way they would normally apply. For example, you can disable all the user-side settings, the user configuration, or you can disable the computer configuration setting, or you can disable all of them, or both, actually. So in order to do that, let's take a look at an example here. Here I've gone ahead and created a group policy object, and I just called it computer and user GPO, because it has a setting on the computer side, it has a setting on the user side. And if we go to settings here, by the way, you can see all the settings there. If I just click show all, for example, it shows me that it's forcing our computers to use the high performance power plan, and it's removing the recycle bin from the desktop, and we can see that here. There's no recycle bin on this computer where I've got a user logged on, and I can't change the policy even if I'm an administrator. So here I'm an administrator. Again, I don't have the recycle bin. But even if I try to go into, let's say, control panel here, where's my control panel? There it is. And I go into system and security, and I try to adjust the policy for, or the settings for the power options. Notice that even when I click on this link, which would normally give me the permission, I can't change it. It doesn't let me choose balanced here. That's because of this policy right here for an active power plan, and again, we don't have the recycle bin either. So what if I wanted to change this so that I wanted only the user side settings to apply? In other words, only this recycle bin thing, but I wanted to give back the active power plan, and I wanted to disable the computer side settings. What I could do is to right click on the group policy object and go to the GPO status and choose computer configuration settings disabled. And now once I do that, we click on show all, and we can see that this setting right here is disabled even though it still appears here because the policy is set that way, but it's going to be disabled. In other words, it's just going to be ignored. So if I go back over to this computer, for example, it hasn't taken effect yet, and I may have to log off and log back on again or even restart the computer. But again, I'm going to go to GP update and press enter. And having done that, once I then will go to the control panel here and try to again adjust the settings here for power, then once I get into this now, we're going to see that indeed I can change this, and I can click the little link there. Now I can flip back and forth. That's because, again, we have now disregarded or disabled the computer side settings there by going to GP status and checking that mark. Now let me clear that to bring that setting back and show you that you can also do the same thing for the user side settings. So now the user side settings are disabled and the computer side settings are enabled. So now I'll again update my group policy object, and then what will happen here, for this one I'll have to log back off and on again to see the recycle bin reappear. But otherwise, you'll also see that now once I've put that policy back into place the way I have, that in control panel again, system and security for power options, that once again I do not have the capability of flipping back and forth here. Okay, but let me log off, and when I log back on again, we'll see that I now also do have the recycle bin because I've enabled the computer side settings, which take away the power settings, but I've disabled the user side settings, which gives me back the recycle bin. And having logged back on here, we see that the recycle bin indeed did come back. I still don't have access to the power plan settings, though, because of the fact that the computer configuration settings are enabled, but the user configuration settings are disabled. By the way, it sometimes gets a little bit confusing because of this double negative kind of thing. We're removing something, but we're disabling the removal of it, which means that I get it. Okay, remember, two negatives equals a positive. So this is negative, and removing is kind of a negative as well. So this tells me that I actually get the recycle bin. You kind of have to go back to English class sometimes to properly interpret some of these things. Now, the other thing I could do would be to simply block inheritance. Let's go ahead and take a look at that here as well. This policy right now is linked to the Arizona, or the AZ, organizational unit, and it flows down to my users and to my computers. That's why we're seeing the effects of this policy. But what I could do is to block inheritance. Now, you got to be really careful of this one. Notice that it does put on the little exclamation point onto that organizational unit, indicating that it's blocking inheritance. Well, it might be that I've got, let's just pretend I've got dozens of policies up here, but the only one I really don't like and really can't live with is this computer and user GPO. I hate that thing. But when I block inheritance there, it blocks all policies, all of them. Okay, so that's probably too broad of a stroke for most purposes. And also notice that once I block that inheritance over on my group policy inheritance over here, it shows me only this one that's actually directly linked to the OU. If I remove the blocking of inheritance, remember here all of the policies come back again. So I'm going to block this, and we're not going to see any of these Nugget Lab defaults apply, which includes the clock, okay, because I removed the clock down here because, well, I don't want it to be 12 o'clock and you be able to see the time down there, and then all of a sudden it jumps to 3:30, and you know I took a 3.5-hour lunch break. Not that I would do that. CBT Nuggets is listening, so I don't want them to know about these things. And don't tell them, okay? So anyway, so what I want to do here is, if I block inheritance, then we should see that clock come back, shouldn't we? So let's go ahead and update our policy. I'll do a GP update. And once I log off and log back on again, we should see the clock then appear. And having gone into my settings here for taskbar navigation and system icons, if I go back over here to the clock and turn it on, you should see that now indeed I have a 3 p.m. down there. Now let me turn that off before I get myself in trouble. But the point here is, since that policy no longer applies, I have the option of turning this on and off, whereas before I wouldn't have had that capability. And I think we're still in time. Let me go prove that over on this computer where I have another user logged on, and we haven't refreshed policy yet over here. So if I go to the properties of the taskbar area here and go to customize, and then go to the system icons for on and off, notice that here it just doesn't even let me click it. You know, I can click some of these other things, but I can't click the clock because the group policy object has not yet been overridden by the block policy inheritance here. And again, to be really careful about blocking all the policies, because again, there could be dozens of policies that we really need to have applied up here, and that could affect our security, that could affect our functionality, it could affect our network connectivity, firewall settings, lots of different things there, so you got to be very, very careful about wherever you block policy inheritance. Now, for example, with this one, let's say that, oh, those rascals down in Arizona, they think they can get away with anything. And they want to block policy inheritance for all these policies, including our Nugget Lab defaults, but we're going to click on Enforced here. What this means is, and if you look up at the icon, there's a little padlock on it now. What this means is that it's going to force that specific policy down through and punch it through here to AZ and all of the sub-OUs, even though they're trying to block policy inheritance. So if I go back over here, and once again, I try to do a GP update, and then I go back to my task properties, what is it called? My taskbar properties here. Then I should now no longer be able to bring back the clock area. And indeed here you can see it's off and I can't select it anymore, even though I'm logged on, for example, as an administrator right here. So to review that, what did we do again? We first blocked inheritance right here so that nobody would receive these Nugget Lab defaults as well as these other policies. And then we decided, you know what, you're not going to get away with that. So we right-clicked here to choose Enforced, and now it punches it on down through. Now, as a general rule, these are kind of nice little buttons and switches that you can turn on and off, okay, for blocking and enforcing. You got to be careful, though, because this gets very confusing, because you can get many levels deep. You might have a dozen levels deep of organizational units, all with little padlocks and exclamation points, and by the time you get to the end, it's very difficult to know and keep straight in your mind what's being enforced, what's being blocked, and again, also, with when you disable certain halves of computer settings. So, for example, if you disable user configuration settings, or computer settings, or if you disable all settings, you know, this gets very, very confusing, and that's one reason why the settings that we see here, for an example over here on my organizational unit, when I click on Group Policy Inheritance, it really helps to see what's coming down here, and we know that these are enforced, and so on. Okay, so that was blocking and enforcing. Let's also take a look at security filtering. Now, for that, I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to not force everything anymore, so I'm going to unenforce. But I'm also going to unblock, and we should now see the normal application and normal flow of our group policy objects, and we see them there. So I'm going to refresh everything and then come back and continue on. And in fact, if you find yourself having to make a lot of those kinds of exceptions where you're forcing and blocking and and all in disabling settings and all that sort of thing, you probably need to rethink your organizational unit design, because the flow of your group policy objects should follow a logical flow for your OUs. Now let's take a look at this, for example. Look at my Phoenix admins. Normally you want them to be highly privileged, don't you? But look, they're here underneath Phoenix users, where we're also locking the taskbar. So if I wanted to remove some restrictions from them, I would probably need to move them back up, for example, up to at least the Phoenix level. So I might click then and drag them up here to Phoenix, for example. And now they would no longer be subject to any of the group policy objects. Let me refresh the view here. Any of the group policy objects that apply to Phoenix users, such as locking that taskbar. It's just a good strategy that you really have to start thinking through with group policy object management. Now, when it comes to the security filtering, though, here I've gone back to my computer and user GPO, which, remember here, has taken away the power settings, that I can't change the power plan, and it also removes the recycle bin from the desktop. Now, here if we look at the Scope tab for this policy, we see that Authenticated Users appears there, and that appears for all policies by default unless you make a change. So, what this means is, this policy is going to apply to the computers, because computers are considered users in Active Directory, and they have a password and they actually log on. And then, of course, your users themselves also have a password and they log on. So, computers and users are authenticated users, therefore it applies. Now, if I don't want that behavior and I want to be very granular and specific, what I could do is to remove that, and I could remove that now and then click on Add. And maybe I want this to apply to only Phoenix users. And I have a group policy, or rather I have a group membership for Phoenix users here. And if we take a look at it, in Phoenix users, the membership there is all of my Phoenix users that appear right here, okay, including Phoenix user 01. So, again, now it's only going to apply to Phoenix users. So if I go over here and to this user and I reapply the policy, so I'll do a GP update, GP update, helps you if you spell it properly. Then we'll see that this policy still applies, right? So even if I log off and log back on again, and let me do that real quick. So here I've logged back on, and I don't have my recycle bin. I still can't change my power plan. But let me switch to a different computer where I've also updated policy and log back off and log back on again. Here you can see I'm logged on as a Phoenix admin, but I have the recycle bin, and I have the ability to change my power plan. Why is that? Because back over here in my Active Directory users and computers, I have a security group for Phoenix admins that Phoenix admin 01 is a member of. But Phoenix admin 01 is not a member of the Phoenix users security group right here. And the Phoenix users security group is the only one that's actually receiving this policy because of the security filtering. All right, my last nugget went a little too long. This one's also going to get a little too long if I don't stop now. So I'm going to stop right here, and I'm going to resume the discussion with WMI filtering and loopback processing in our next nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.